Rise and shine, Mr. Freeman. Rise and shine. Not that I wish to imply you have been sleeping on the job. No one is more deserving of a rest, and all the effort in the world would have gone to waste until... well, let's just say your hour has come again.
Whether or not you like Half-Life, you can't deny the game had a huge impact on the industry. At a time when most FPS games were all following suit, came a title that brought the gaming world into a much more believable setting. No more collecting keycards and floating weapons, you now move through a real, living, breathing world and watch the story unfold before your very eyes. I can still remember people who weren't into gaming asking me about Half-Life. I mean, it was that big at the time, so when we all heard that Half-Life 2 was being developed, we kinda lost our shit. Valve teased us constantly with amazing tech demos and gameplay videos, and we finally got the full release in November 2004 for the PC, and what a year 2004 turned out to be. Doom 3, Thief Deadly Shadows, Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, and Halo 2. Even amongst all of these heavyweights, Half-Life 2 still stood out as one of the best FPS games to come along in recent years, and yeah, fair enough, it was a pretty damn good game. It even won 39 Game of the Year awards, so it pretty much has to be good, right? Well, yes and no. So after the events of Half-Life 1, Gordon Freeman, everyone's favourite theoretical physicist, is brought out of stasis by the mysterious G-Man, an elusive figure from the first game whose intentions are still unknown. He awakens somewhere called City 17 at a time when the human race has been brought under control by an alien race known as the Combine. The events in Half-Life basically ended up turning Earth into a homing beacon, and the Combine saw their chance and took it, decimating mankind in something called the 7-Hour War. The survivors are made up of scientists who conveniently previously worked with Gordon at Black Mesa and now form a resistance against those who chose to side with the Combine and have been turned into half-man, half-machine infantry units that do their bidding. At the helm of this is the former Black Mesa Administrator Wallace Breen, the closest thing to an antagonist, even though his intentions are somewhat noble. Gordon soon meets up with Barney Calhoun, Dr. Kleiner, and Alex Vance, three people heavily involved in the resistance, and from there you're on the run from the Combine.
Dr. Freeman, I presume.
Trying to meet up with Alex's father Eli to assist them in their research, though this doesn't come to pass, and you end up back in your HEV suit faster than you can say bull squid. What they've done here is take the character templates like the security guard and the scientist character models from Half-Life 1 and turned them into actual characters, not that this is a bad thing. New characters like Alex Vance and her trusty robot sidekick Dog are likeable and welcome additions. Now, Half-Life 2 crafts an amazing world with a palpable setting that is seldom seen in FPS games. The opening level where you arrive in City 17 is a standout as you see firsthand the despair the citizens are subject to.
Everything's gonna be okay.
What are we going to do?
Once again, like the first game, the entire narrative is delivered from a first-person view, with it never leaving Gordon's perspective. What serves as cinematics are just long scenes of dialogue where people stand around talking exposition to get the plot moving. These sequences are voice acted and animated pretty well, and all of the main cast of characters have unique personalities and their own motives and goals. The combination of the sound and music with all of these subtle storytelling elements creates this world that just grabs a hold of you and never lets go. Kelly Bailey returns from the first game to compose the game's music, and I couldn't make a review without mentioning it. It's one of the best soundtracks of any first-person shooter period. It's minimalistic in the sense that it's not constant, but the songs that do play are really awesome and they sound similar to those from Half-Life 1, which is a good thing. Speaking of Half-Life 1, there's also the return of creatures like the headcrabs and vortigaunts, who are now allied with the humans, as well as the new forces of the Combine, from the various foot soldiers through to gunships and manhacks, which are flying razor blades that cut up everything in their path. The Combine foot soldiers are actually smart cookies, able to lob grenades at your feet with ease, and they're also very accurate with their weapons, able to flank and retreat if the situation calls for it. There is enough to deal with, but the difficulty comes from their numbers more so than their actual intelligence. Half-Life 2 also showcased the brand spanking new Source engine, something that's still being used to this day, which does show its age in certain areas, but this is still a damn good looking game. Facial animations for characters is very well done, and some of the textures still look up to snuff. It can be optimized out the wazoo, though I couldn't imagine there'd be too many people who couldn't run this maxed out these days. Now, Half-Life 2 is a game that constantly changes up the paradigm of the gameplay almost chapter to chapter. It starts off simple enough as you're escaping the city, fighting the basic Combine forces, before getting into an airboat and moving up a lengthy polluted canal, before switching up again and putting you in a zombie-infested town named Ravenholm, then putting you back in another vehicle, this time a buggy, as you drive up a dilapidated highway. Now that would be enough for most games, but Half-Life 2 continues to mix things up. The next area is set in a prison called Nova Prospekt, where you control a squad of bugs known as antlions, before the final chapters where you're in a large-scale battle back in City 17. This time you're controlling squads of other human soldiers, fighting the Combine's elite forces and taking down large walking turrets known as Striders as you make your way to the Citadel, the Combine Nexus. And even within all of these chapters, you'll still be doing little mini things like taking out gunships with the laser-guided RPG, using a crane to lower a bridge, or traversing across the suspensions of a railway bridge with a good 200 or so feet drop below you. Hope you're not scared of heights. Certain levels even let you fight alongside Alex or Barney, and these moments are great too, mostly. Compared to many other FPS games, the variety in the gameplay is exemplary. About a third into the game, you're given something called the 0-point manipulator or gravity gun that shows off the game's physics engine, letting you pick up practically anything in the game world that isn't nailed down and turn it into a weapon against enemies. And this is going to come in handy because the game world is cluttered with physics items that constantly get underfoot and block your movement. Barrels, crates, even smaller things like buckets of paint can stop you dead in your tracks. You'll also use pretty much the exact same weapons from the first game, though they're all updated to suit the setting. The only real new weapon, aside from the gravity gun, is the Overwatch rifle, which is basically a heavier version of the submachine gun. It has a secondary fire mode that literally disintegrates everything it hits. The HAV suit also has some minor upgrades like a zoom and sprint mode, the sprint mode strangely sharing its power source with your flashlight and air supply. Anyway, in regards to the campaign, the Ravenholm and Nova Prospekt chapters are by far the standouts. Ravenholm is basically just a physics sandbox, giving you a whole heap of zombies to kill with tools like buzzsaw blades and explosive barrels, as well as environmental traps that you can use to your heart's content. Nova Prospekt is great as well, and you're controlling the antlions as if you're a squad leader or something, setting them after the dim-witted Combine by using a pheromone pod. Later in the chapter, you set up defensive turrets and hold out against waves of Combine as they swarm your position, which can be enjoyable or irritating depending on how you set your turrets up. It's just that a lot of the other chapters pale in comparison, like the Canal and Highway chapters. Now this is really more of a subjective thing, but I really think the Canal chapter just goes on way too long, especially for a first time playthrough. You're in this kind of cat and mouse scenario with a large gunship, but it's a little bit overplayed and it just goes on far too long for its own good. The chapter where you're in the buggy driving up the highway again is a neat idea, but the controls for the buggy aren't all that great. It feels like the car has too much traction, and there's an insane amount of understeer, making it difficult to drive at times. I've also noticed a weird sort of fixation with the way the levels are often designed. Let me explain. A lot of the game is centered around this mechanic of the AI being given the upper hand, like you're put in a fixed location for a period of time and have to defend against waves and waves of enemies. For instance, they might put the enemies on a high vantage point and let them get the drop on you. Now this kind of thing happens frequently in the campaign, and I think it's almost a deliberate move to make the game world seem hopeless and overbearing, like someone spent a bit too much time overthinking the psychology of the level design, and thought it would add to the atmosphere or something if they constantly let the enemies get the advantage. Let me tell you something, it doesn't add shit. That doesn't make me relate to the feeling of hopelessness or despair the human race might be contemplating, it just makes me think the level designer is a dickhead. But the true nuisances are the chapters where you're fighting alongside the resistance members towards the end of the game who cling to you as if you're surgically attached to them. These motherfuckers get in the way constantly and it is extremely frustrating. In fact, almost every single time you're accompanied by AI teammates, you can expect to have your movement hindered somewhat. Now if this happened in any single other game series, it would have been torn to shreds, but because it's Half-Life 2, people often overlook it, which is horse shit. This is a huge annoyance that occurs frequently, and it makes chaotic gunfights unfairly tricky because you're dealing with the hindrance of your teammates who function like bollards, as well as the Combine. These last few chapters are often bullshit hard. I mean, I know that was the point, it's the end of the campaign and all that, but the increase in difficulty comes out of nowhere. And it's such a contrast to the other chapters in the game, which really are a cakewalk by comparison. I mean, you're suddenly fighting, 3 Striders at once who can each survive 5 or 6 direct blasts from an RPG, and the hit scanning gun they fire at you will kill you in seconds. One thing I can't deny is that all of these levels are memorable. Going through the game again to get the footage for this review, I kept remembering all those little set pieces and moments that still stuck in my head almost a decade later since I first played it.
Poor Laszlo! The finest mind of his generation had come to such an end.
When you do finally make your way to the top of the Citadel for the game's finale, you really feel like you've made this incredible journey, and it's a tremendous sense of accomplishment as you've literally scaled a mountain to get there. So after the cliffhanger ending of Half-Life 2, people were thirsty for more, and Valve took on the episodic content idea as a way to extend and continue the story between Half-Life 2 and the inevitable Half-Life 3 with what was planned to be 3 short episodes. The first episode was aptly named Episode 1, released in 2006, and it takes place right after the end of Half-Life 2. Without spoiling anything, you're basically just with Alex once again, trying to make your way out of City 17 before the Combine Citadel explodes. There's a few new features added in, like the ability to reprogram roller mines to attack your enemies, as well as a new zombie type called the Zombine, which is a Combine zombie wearing body armor, able to pull out a live grenade and charge at you kamikaze style. There's a real emphasis this time on the relationship between Alex and Gordon, as she's with you pretty much the entire time. She does kill the odd enemy, and I mean, there are worse things to look at, right?
Zombine. Right? Zombine, get it?
Episode 1 is alright, I guess, though it does start off really slowly. There's only 5 chapters in the game, and you don't have any weapons for the first 2, nor do you have them for a significant portion of the 3rd chapter. It's nice seeing all of the characters return though, especially cool is how they're physically affected by the results of the Combine's defeat. Barney, for instance, looks like death warmed up, but overall this episode left me feeling a little bit unsatisfied. There's a fantastic shootout in a hospital towards the end of the episode with Combine and zombies that's a total free-for-all, but the ending sequence is really crappy, where you just escort a dozen or so resistance members to a train and then have a fight with the Strider. Also, it's only got a length of about 2 or so hours. It's only worth playing to help set up the events in Episode 2, which is where things get truly kick-ass. Episode 2 is even arguably better than the original game. Episode 2 has another somewhat slow start where Alex is critically injured and you're working with the Vortigons to heal her, but then it's just balls to the wall action for the remainder of the episode. You're back in a vehicle again, this time it's a modified hot rod as you're driving cross country with Alex, taking on an all new enemy type called the Hunters. Hunters are the real deal. These pricks can take a lot of damage and they have these flechettes that they fire at you that can also explode on impact for extra damage. They're easily the toughest enemies in the game and you'll be encountering them frequently. You'll take an ecological journey through an antlion nest before an impressive set piece where you take on waves of them with a couple of badass Vortigons. There's another set piece where you're ambushed inside an energy field by the somewhat dwindling Combine forces, and then the finale where you take on waves and waves of Striders. It's mostly great stuff, accentuated once again by Kelly Bailey's awesome soundtrack. Another thing Episode 2 does quite well is the way it handles the story. There's a lot more stuff going on with the main characters, and the end cliffhanger is legendary. Something else I like is the fact that Episode 2 has a lot more humour in it compared to the previous games, which were practically bone dry. This is personified with the new character Dr. Magnuson, who may be the funniest son of a bitch in the entire series.
If you pull this off, I might just forgive you for that debacle at Black Mesa. You know the one I mean, involving a certain microwave casserole.
This is probably the best looking game in the series as well. Some of the outdoor environments are really expansive, but still feature lots of great little details and good texture work. It's a real contrast from the cramped urban areas of Episode 1. I think this is the best of the bunch. I mean, the pacing is a lot more action orientated and ultimately more enjoyable. As I said, there's a lot of dialogue and story stuff going on at the end as you'd expect, and this is probably one of the biggest nail-biting endings in the entire Half-Life franchise, if not FPS games in general. The only thing I don't like about Episode 2 is the finale against all the Striders. It's just a real test of patience, where you race back and forth between key points to stop them from advancing. It's a bit of a shame considering how good the rest of the episode is. With the original game and these 2 episodes, you're looking at anywhere from 20 to 30 hours content for a first time playthrough. I don't care whether or not you give 2 shits about Gordon Freeman, that is damn good value. Is Half-Life 2 a masterpiece though? Well, sure, it won 39 Game of the Year awards, but those Game of the Year awards are like giving gold stars to a kid in primary school because he learnt all of his times tables. Half-Life 2 is definitely a good game. It's arguably one of the best FPS series of all time. What it does do is throw you into this insanely engrossing game world with believable characters and some intense gunfights. That much is true. At a time when old school games were on the decline, Half-Life 2 came along with no iron sights, fixed health bars, and those magical ladders you can scale without having to put your weapon down. These factors don't make it bad, but it does mean it's not quite the industry-defining title its prequel was. But I still think any self-confessed gamer should have still finished Half-Life 2 and the episodes at least once in their lives. Similar to films like Star Wars and Indiana Jones, it's a timeless story about humanity fighting back against an alien force, and the gameplay still largely holds up a decade after its release. I'd like to think at some point in this lifetime I'll be around to witness the release of Half-Life 3, but in the meantime, Half-Life 2 will more than fill the gap.
Ah yes, Gordon Freeman. Couldn't have asked for a finer volunteer.